So the journey of stones. So first, before we get into the journey of stones, I just have to acknowledge my appreciation for the last song. It's something I always love that song. It's the only time that we ever do it is Good Friday. But it puts us in a place that we look at Judas sometimes and we're always like, Judas, that's a bad guy. We look at Peter and he denied Jesus. And it puts us in a position of being the people, not just those villains. So tonight as we look at the final stone that's laid, this is kind of the closing moments. As Jesus says, it is finished. It's the closing moments of Jesus' earthly life. But this is found in the book of John, Gospel of John. As you find, John is there as he records it. He says, hey, this is the thing right here. This is how John closes out Jesus' last breath. Now, some of the other Gospels, they decide to do it a different way. I also added the Luke passage in there for the death because I wanted to also show you the John passage. Because the John passage is where, John also is bringing in an idea that's bigger than just Jesus breathed his last. We get that's going to happen to Jesus. In every Gospel, we know that Jesus gives up his life. John says, as Jesus' last words, it is finished. So what is it? It is finished. What is it? This whole plan that God had from the very beginning, God didn't just throw in Jesus as plan B. Jesus was always going to be plan A. The plan to be able to bring us back into a right relationship with God. This was it. Jesus says, it is finished. This is it. This is the plan. This is how it was going to go all along. What else is it? It's also the life project of Jesus when Jesus came. And one of the first moves that he made, he was sitting in the temple. He picked up the scroll and said that I'm here to be able to bring freedom to the captives. This, it is finished, concludes what Jesus just said there. He's brought freedom to those that were in captivity. This, it, was the end of our horrific week. The week was over. Jesus is dead. This is the work of salvation. This isn't just a piece of salvation. This isn't just, I wonder if this is it. You're saying, no, this is it. When Jesus says it's finished, that means salvation has come to you and to me. It is finished. It's certain. When we look at this whole thing, and this is the amazing thing about this whole process, that it's not just the people who stood up and lied, but the whole thing was not only just against Jewish law, but it was also against Roman law. The first thing, the trial was at night. They never have trials at night, whether it's Roman or Jewish. You never have a trial at night. That was the first thing that broke the law. The second thing, it was convicted by a single judge, one person, Pontius Pilate, said, send him away, crucify him. You see, the law, actually Roman law, says that they needed at least 3 judges in order to make that call, and yet only one judge made the call. The deliberation process, when they heard the whole, the whole trial, all of the witnesses, then they should have been able to take at least another day in order to extend it, to make sure you're thinking through this, because you're going to send a person to their death. This isn't something that you should make a rash decision on. They broke the law. Romans, Jewish, they broke the law in the whole system, the whole trial, everything that was there. They broke the law. And yet, this was exactly how it was supposed to be. If you think about that, think about the ways in which there's all kinds of things that could have happened. There's all kinds of things that could have been outside of what God already said was going to happen, and yet it was exactly the way that God spoke it. Last night, Maundy Thursday service, at the end of the service when the altar was being stripped, Psalm 22 was read. And I don't know if you recognize Psalm 22 in the process, but exactly the things that were spoken of in Psalm 22, exactly the things that happened. Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? First verse. Verse number 7. People mocked, spat at him. Verse 16, people divided up his clothes. You see, all throughout Psalm 22, we see exactly how it went. And guess what? That was written 1,000 years before the death of Jesus. This was exactly the way it was always going to be. God knew it. Jesus knew it. Part of the other injustice, you see, if Jesus was executed under Jewish law, he never would have been crucified. Why? Because crucifixion was a Roman torture device, was a Roman's way of executing people. The Jews could not kill Jesus this way. This is the reason why they were trying to push it off on the Romans. Hey, no, why don't you declare it to be so? And this is the reason why there was that banter back and forth when Pontius Pilate's like, hey, I've talked to Jesus. He's not guilty of any Roman law in which I should put him to death. And he tried to go back to them and say, "Guess, don't kill this man. He's innocent." And they tried to be able to find a way out. They brought up that, as they call him in the scriptures, sometimes a barbarian or sometimes a revolutionary by the name of Barabbas. They said, hey, guess what? There's an out here. Usually now you get one chance to be able to free a prisoner. And now we got Jesus, who's innocent. And you got this revolutionary, probably, who has murdered multiple people. And Pontius Pilate's almost setting it up that way. He's like, so, which one, guys? And they said, free Barabbas. And he said, well, what am I going to do with Jesus? And what did they say? Crucify him. Crucify him. You see, the Jews, when they wanted to kill somebody, they would stone them. Sometimes that meant burying them, usually outside of the city. In other cases, it was you take them to a little bit of a cliff, you push them off, usually so that when they fall, they break their legs so they can't get back up again, and then everybody just throws stones at them until they die. But it was never the way it was supposed to be. The Messiah was always going to hang on a criminal's cross. Crucifixion was slower, more painful than the stoning would have been. And we're not even going to get into the flogging just yet. When we were looking at crucifixion, the Romans were trying to figure out the best way possible in order to make people suffer the most. Crucifixion checked all the boxes. It was long. It was excruciating. Most of the time when people were crucified, it actually took them a few days in order to die. But you know, really the part that kills you in the crucifixion is exhaustion. Because you're trying to push yourself back up in order to get breath into your lungs again. And you can do that for a long while. You can keep pushing yourself up. Your feet are nailed to the cross, but you can keep pushing yourself up again. But eventually you give up. Your arms slope. You lose breath. You asphyxiate. You die. It was interesting, the American Medical Association. Now, this is the medical of all the doctors, right? So somebody was looking at the death of Jesus, and they put together an American Medical Association, like if they were going to do an autopsy of Jesus, this is kind of the way that they talked about Jesus' death. So the first thing, they talked about the scourging, the flogging. So let's get into that. You get the cattails, right? So you get this whip that has leather strips, and at the end of the leather strips are either glass, bone, stones, and usually sharp ones. So what would happen is that when they take this cattail, usually 9 pieces of leather, and they would whip them, usually what would happen is that these pieces would get caught in the flesh, and then when they pull it, it rips the flesh apart. Now, I don't like to get brutal, but sometimes we don't understand the reality of why Jesus was on that cross for not very long. Because they would take 39 lashes. And you say, why 39? Why only 39 lashes? It seems like, like you could probably go more. Because it was often thought and believed, because they tested it out, trial and error, that at 40 lashes, it would kill a man. Jesus was whipped 39 times. So you can imagine, as we read that Isaiah chapter 53, the suffering servant chapter, that it says that stripes were on Jesus' back. Those are the lacerations. The Medical Association says that the first part of Jesus' downfall, if you were looking at his lacerations, he probably lost a lot of blood. The scourging produced the stripes, the lacerations, and it set the stage for what's called hypervolemic shock, which means the body's like, what is happening to me? Shock is setting in. You don't know what's happening. This is the reason why when Jesus was carrying the crossbeam and he fell down multiple times, the crossbeam itself was probably about 100 pounds. And his body's going into shock. They grabbed the one guy off the street, said, hey, you're going to help Jesus. And he's like, I'm not a criminal. Don't lump me in with this guy. But you can see, as he's carrying his cross, having a hard time doing it. But a medical association said accordingly, though, death resulted primarily from shock and from exhaustion asphyxiation. His airway closed. You get to the part that when Jesus is dead, the soldier comes along with the spear and shoves it into the side of Jesus. And it says something like, blood and water come out. This means that Jesus was already dead. But you see, the medical diagnosis says that through this process, like if the shock and the beating didn't kill him, that then, yes, he most likely, as it would have been found, that he would have been asphyxiated, that he would have given up breath. But if that didn't even kill him, that the spear in the side of Jesus piercing would have finished it off. We look at the nature of this whole thing, and Jesus is dead. Joseph of Arimathea, who was a Pharisee, and what we would call one of the secret disciples. Why was he a secret? Because much like many of these Pharisees, that the Pharisees, remember, they're the ones that we have journeyed through the Gospels, and the Pharisees were always after Jesus, always trying to catch him in something, always trying to figure out how to eliminate Jesus. But some of these Pharisees heard what Jesus said, but they couldn't publicly attach themselves to the Christ. Joseph was one of them. And it wasn't until the death of Jesus that he's the one that claims the body. And he takes Jesus' body to a tomb that has never been used. And he takes his body that's covered in the shroud, it's covered in a nice white cloth, right? Because they don't have time to do all the burial that's necessary because Passover is now hit. They're not supposed to be working. They're not supposed to definitely be anywhere around death. So they wrap him in the shroud with a couple of burial spices, and they lay him in there. And it says then at that tomb that they put the stone in front. Now, looking at this, they actually believe that the way that most of these tombs would work is it would be more like a giant kind of disc-like stone. They would have a little bit of a groove within it, and it took multiple soldiers in order to make sure that stone was sealed. Why did they have to seal the tomb? Because they were afraid that somebody was going to come along, like one of his disciples, steal the body, claim resurrection, and start another revolution. So Rome had to make sure that they would not be humiliated in front of these people, and so they did what was necessary to make sure that that tomb was sealed. Nobody could move it. And just in case, they took a couple of Roman guards to watch the tomb. Now we look at the death of Jesus. We look at the moment in history and we can say, hey, let's look at this just in a historical manner and be able to try to dig through it and be able to try to find it. Now there's a million different documentaries out there. If you ever want to find one and watch it, pretty interesting stuff. Usually they have the same, kind of characters that come across there. There's usually one that has really bushy eyebrows, and he's the one that's usually trying to debunk things, and he can't seem to do it. But you see, that's not what this is about. This process isn't meant to just be taken historically and just leave it at that. It's meant to hit us personally. It's the reason for the detail in the crucifixion. Because it's not meant to just be whitewashed. It's not meant to just be, hey, let's try to sanitize this the best way possible so that we don't have to offend anybody, so that we don't have to be able to make anybody angry at the way that we're going to portray this. This should be taken personally. Why? Because the stones that we have placed, even though metaphorical, is the sin that was in our life. We've taken it and we've put it at the cross. This brings us to the weight of it. These stones, not so heavy when you're carrying one, maybe 2, 6. But when we try to carry them all, you try to carry all the stones in all of the world. You try to carry the sin of every single person that's ever lived. We take that sin, and that sin has weight because we know our own and the weight that we have tried to carry it. And Jesus took everyone's. The cross didn't just weigh 100 pounds. The enormous weight that was placed on Jesus makes this real. And it makes it personal. That final stone that was rolled in front of the entrance of Jesus' grave makes it real. These are very tangible things in which we have placed on Jesus. This is the reason why every single week at Tabor Church, we do what's called confession and absolution, confession and forgiveness. Why? Because we don't want to be able to just say, hey, there's one day a week or one day a year that we come around and we be able to repent and get these sins off of our chest. Jesus doesn't want us to carry that weight. So we don't wait till Good Friday. Because as hard as we try to be able to make sure that our sin is somehow weighed out with our good, somehow we try to be able to say, hey, I know that I've got to, if I did this against people, then I've got to try to be nice to somebody so that I can somehow balance the scales. Well, how much is enough? When you've lied against somebody, how much is it going to take to balance that out? One nice word? Maybe 3. I don't even know. You see, that's the games that we try to play with the sin that we have in our life. We're trying to be able to balance things out. We're trying to be able to say, hey, if I'm just good enough, if I just need to get into heaven being good enough. Well, guess what? We're not. We try as we might, can't remove the stones. We can't remove the stone in front of the tomb. Helpless, hopeless, partners in the crucifixion. That's what we are. And the things that make it real are those words. It is finished. We hear the words. We receive the words. It is finished. Indeed. In Jesus' name. Amen.